Very good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's Amateur Radio Technician class, session number 14. When we take a look at our curriculum, we notice that we have progressed nicely, and we are coming towards the end of the topics that we need to cover under the technician class. Last class, we looked at repeater, auxiliary, and space stations. We discussed what a linked repeater network is. We discussed, again, repeater offset, also PL, CTC/SS, also called tone. We looked at troubleshooting repeater access, also operating procedures, how to identify and make a call. We discussed simplex operation. We looked at the national calling frequency. We discussed HF operations. We talked about what Q signals or Q codes are. We had a look at the concept of a band plan. We discussed emergency communications or MCOMs. We had a look at organizations such as ARES and RACES. We also talked about a net control station. We discussed message handling. We had a look at what the phonetic alphabet was. We discussed satellite operation. What was UV mode? We had a look at satellite tracking. We talked a bit about what were Keplerian elements, also known as KEPs. We looked at two concepts important to satellite operation, Doppler shift and spin fading. We also considered what contesting was. We looked at what a grid locator is. And we also talked a bit about radio direction finding. And we ended with IRLP. So today, let me just get into the Q&A first. So just one question of clarification. So I was able to confirm, yes, in Trinidad and Tobago, REACT does in fact perform some of the activities or operations that ARES and RACES perform in the United States. So we will continue where we left off, just a couple of slides to finish up the theory in this section, and then we'll go straight into the questions in the question pool, and we will attempt to go through those as quickly as possible, seeing that we covered all of the theory. So, Echo Link. Many hams, when you get licensed, may not have any equipment. So Echo Link software allows licensed amateur radio operators or stations to communicate with one another using software. So it's a form of voice over IP technology, and Echolink can be used in several ways. So if we were to look at this slide, in the middle here, you see what essentially is an app. This is the Echolink app that is, I think this is on the Android platform, where you don't have to have a radio, but this is the Android app called Echolink, and you can talk. Notice that there's a transmit button at the bottom there. You can actually talk on Echolink using your phone, and your transmission, when you talk on your phone, actually goes out over the internet, voice over IP, and can connect to reflectors and radio transmitters such as repeaters. So even though you are just using your phone, you're not using a radio with RF, you're using your phone, your transmission can end up on RF or radio frequency via interconnected repeaters. So on the right-hand side here, this is the Echolink software on Windows. And notice you have call signs, and in Trinidad and Tobago, you see a lot of 9Y4s, 9Z4s that are online at the time. And you can, in fact, use the microphone and speaker of a laptop or computer, desktop computer, and transmit as well. But to do that, you have to register. If anyone were just able to download the software and use it, then that would be very odd, because remember, to use amateur radio spectrum, you must have an amateur radio license. So to be able to use Echolink, note that your call sign must be registered with Echolink, and you would need to provide proof of your license. So you can't just go anyone and just use Echolink just so. You need to use Echolink after having been validated. Also, when you're using Echolink, the app or the software, you are coming through the internet and you can connect to other users who are in their car or their homes through the same Echolink ecosystem. So note, Echolink is another example similar to IRLP of voice over IP linking software. The concept of nodes. So any endpoint or any point of transmission and so on is considered a node. So we say that you can see a list of the nodes or the active users using VoIP or voice over IP, such as Echolink and IRLP, and you can do it by either of these three means. And the reason we have it here listed for you is because this is an actual exam question. You can subscribe to an online service. You can get the list of nodes from online repeater lists that's maintained by the local repeater frequency coordinator. So that could just simply be a simple website and a repeater directory. And that repeater directory can either be a website or it could be an app on the phone. So these are the ways that you can get a list of active nodes or operators or stations that are using voice over IP technologies. So to access IRLP, so remember last class we had talked about what IRLP was. So how do you access IRLP? So if you have your radio, so this is a handheld radio on the right hand side here, notice there's a keypad, right? So notice it also has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, just like your telephone. This is a microphone for a mobile or a base radio on the right hand side, a hand microphone, and notice it also has numbers as well, right? So you can actually send signals and instructions to a repeater to tell it to connect to another repeater or to connect to a reflector or to connect to a conference bridge so that you can talk with other hams. But to be able to send those instructions, you can use your radio and the keypad. Now the keypad, when you press the keypad, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, it generates what is known as DTMF, or dual tone multi-frequency. You don't actually need to know what that means for your exam, but just to let you know that when you press these knobs, just like your telephones, when you press the keypad on the telephones, you notice it makes tones and each tone sounds different. Well, that is called DTMF. And it's actually a combination. When you press one of these digits, it looks at the frequency table that we're seeing here and generates a tone based on what you press. So this is just a little extra information for you to understand how DTMF tones are generated if you wish to look at it. But for the exam, you just simply need to know when you want to access IRLP nodes, you use DTMF signals, and DTMF is used via the keypad on a radio. We also need to be familiar with the concept of a gateway. And simply for the exam, you need to know a gateway is an amateur radio station that connects other amateur stations to the internet. Just put a diagram here to show you, okay, this is a D-Star gateway. Notice that it's an amateur station and there's a computer connected to the internet. So a gateway is just simply connecting an amateur radio station to the internet, similar to the other concepts that we looked at where we linked repeaters and linked stations and so on. So just note the definition of gateway. Please learn it, memorize it. It's an exam question. All right, so let's go straight into the questions in the question pool before we come back to some of the theory. So we will deal with all of the questions associated with last class, as well as the couple of slides in the slide deck that we looked at today. Right, so we have the questions associated with last class and the slides. So therefore, we will quickly go through the questions. First one, what type of station or amateur station simultaneously retransmits the signal of another amateur station on a different channel or channels? The answer there is a repeater station. What type of amateur station can automatically retransmit the signal of other amateur stations? Well, there are three types. We have the repeater station, auxiliary station, or space station. Right, so recall we do have some slides in the slide deck on that. So if that is unclear, just kindly review last session's slides or last session's video recording. Again, we'll go through quickly these questions because we discussed all the theory before. Which of the following describes a linked repeater network? And it is a network of repeaters where signals received by one repeater are repeated by all the repeaters. Next question. Which of the following is a common repeater frequency offset in the 2 meter band? So these are the key points in the question, offset and 2 meter band. The answer is plus or minus 600 kilohertz. Similar question, what is the common repeater frequency offset in the 70 centimeter band? Again, key points in the question to note, keywords, offset and 70 centimeter band. The answer is plus or minus 5 megahertz. All right. Next question. What term describes the use of a subaudible tone transmitted with normal voice to open the squelch of a receiver? So keywords here, subaudible tone and squelch. The answer is CTCSS, also sometimes called PL, sometimes called tone. Next question. Which of the following could be the reason you are unable to access a repeater whose output you can hear? So this came under the troubleshooting slide, and all of these are correct. You may have an improper offset. You may not have been using 600, use 500, 400, or something else for 2 meters. The repeater may require a proper CTCSS tone from your transceiver, meaning that you're not using a tone at all or you're using a wrong tone. Similar, the repeater may require proper DCS tone from your transceiver. And remember the difference between CTCSS and DCS is CTCSS is analog and DS is digital, but they are both tones. Next question. If a station is not strong enough to keep a repeater's receiver squelch open, which of the following might allow you to receive the station signal? So we talked about this technique. Instead of trying to listen to them on the repeater, you try instead to listen on the repeater input frequency, which is also going to be their transmit, right? So you try to listen to them directly instead of through the repeater. If they're close to you, you might hear them. Yeah. Again, we covered all of that during the theory session last week. What is the most common use of reverse split function of a VHF-UHF transceiver? Well, it's to do just the previous question. It is to allow us to listen on the repeater's input frequency so that you hear the person's transmission direct. What might be the problem if a repeater user says, your transmission are breaking up on voice peaks? We talked about that also as the telltale signs that you might be talking too loudly. What is an appropriate way to call another station on a repeater if you know the other station's call sign? All right. Think about it for a moment. You know the answer. Right. First, you say the station's call sign, then identify with your call sign. So other stations call sign first and your station call sign next. That is the proper and professional way to operate. Remember we had said, think of the word from in your mind. If you have to say to, then that's not quite cutting it. All right, so next question. What brief statement indicates that you are listening on a repeater and looking for a contact? You want to talk to someone. You simply state your call sign. Don't need to say anything else. All right. What term describes an amateur station that is transmitting and receiving on the same frequency? Well, it's not duplex transmission, it's not repeater operation, it is simplex. Transmitting and receiving on the same frequency. Why are simplex channels designated in the UHF and VHF, the VHF and UHF band plans? It is so that stations with within mutual communications range can communicate without tying up a repeater. You don't have to use a repeater to talk to each other. You are close by enough. You can use a simplex channel instead of the repeater. What is the national calling frequency for FM simplex operations in the 2-meter band? So the keywords here are calling frequency, FM simplex, and 2-meter band, right? Again, said you needed to learn this. 146.520 megahertz. That's the frequency or the call channel frequency. Right, again, we're just running through all of this because we dealt with all of these things in this slide deck last class. Next question, what is the meaning of the procedural signal CQ? CQ means calling any station. Which of the following is a guideline when choosing an operating frequency for calling CQ? Well, all of these answers are in fact correct. First, listen to be sure that no one else is using the frequency. Kind of seems to be common sense, so it makes sense, yes? Next, ask if the frequency is in use. Then, make sure that you are in your assigned band, that you're using the correct frequency based on the license that you have as an amateur. Next, how should you respond to a station calling CQ? In other words, somebody calling you. Well, you simply transmit the other station's call sign followed by your call sign. So you should see a pattern. It's always the other station's call sign, then your own. Which of the following is required when making on-the-air test transmissions? So you're testing now. You need to identify yourself. Identify the transmitting station. Don't just say testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Use your call sign. Say, this is 9 Zulu 4 Romeo Golf, testing. So you are identifying the transmitting station. Right. Which cue signal indicates that you're receiving interference from other stations? So the keywords here, cue signal or cue code and receiving interference. The cue code is QRM. Simply need to learn that. Next question. So you only get 2 of these in your exam, possibly. Which cue signal indicates that you are changing frequency? So you want to change frequency to another one? It's QSY. So Ham say, well, you know, we're going to QSY. All right. What is a band plan beyond the privileges established by the FCC? So let's dissect this question a little bit. So they're basically asking you what is a band plan, but they're also telling you beyond the privileges established by the FCC. What they're trying to tell you here is the FCC gives you frequency allocation when you get your license. They will tell you you can use from 144 to 148 megahertz in the 2-meter band, for instance, as a primary, as a ham, as a licensed ham, or as a licensed amateur radio operator. But apart from getting permission to use 144 to 148 megahertz, there's also a voluntary list that breaks up that band from 144 to 148 into smaller segments. And that is the band plan, right? So they're asking you, what is a band plan? A band plan is a voluntary guideline for using different modes or activities within an amateur band. Next question, which of the following applies when 2 stations transmitting on the same frequency interfere with each other? Remember we said, well, at least the slide had said courtesy is contagious, so just always remember to be courteous. Common courtesy should prevail, but no one has an absolute right to an amateur frequency. Remember, it's a shared space, shared spectrum. When you get your amateur radio license, you don't have any exclusive right to any of those frequencies. You share it with your fellow hams. All right. What is the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, also called ARES? It is licensed amateurs who have voluntarily registered their qualifications and equipment for communications duty in the public service. Which of the following describes the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service, or RACES? And all of these are correct. A radio service using amateur frequencies for emergency management or civil defense communications. A radio service using amateur stations for emergency management or civil defense communications. An emergency service using amateur operators certified by a civil defense organization has been enrolled in that organization. So I sort of emphasize some words here: frequencies, stations, operators. All right, so similar answers, but all of them are correct. What do RACES and ARES have in common? Well, both of them may provide communications during emergencies. What is meant by the term NCS used in net operation? NCS simply means Net Control Station. Right? Remember we said that's like the chairperson of a meeting? Right. Okay, which of the following is an accepted practice for an amateur operator who has checked into a net? Okay, so the accepted practices: remain on frequency without transmitting until asked to do so by the net controller. In other words, you stand by. Which of the following is an accepted practice to get the immediate attention of a net control station when reporting an emergency? So let's look at some keywords here. Immediate attention of net control station, emergency. So you have an emergency and you want to get the attention of the NCS or net control station. What do? Well, during the pauses of transmissions, you begin your transmission by saying priority or emergency followed by your call sign. So let's break this down a little bit. Notice you have to say either priority or emergency, and you have to state your call sign. Always state your call sign. So an example will be emergency 9 Zulu 4 Romeo Golf. That is what I will actually say if I had to go to a net control station for an emergency. All right. What does the term traffic refer to in a net operation? Remember we said doesn't mean vehicular traffic. It is formal messages exchanged by net stations. So traffic means messages. Which of the following is a characteristic of good traffic handling? Well, you want to aim for accuracy, so the answer is passing messages exactly as received. What should be done when using voice modes to ensure that voice messages containing unusual words are received correctly? So let's dissect this. So it's voice. In other words, we are talking, we are using speech, and we are passing messages, and we want to make sure it's accurate or received correctly. So those are the key elements of this question. So to do that, we spell the words using a standard phonetic alphabet. Remember we looked at, you don't need to know it for this particular exam, but I encourage you, please learn the phonetic alphabet if you can. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, etc. We have a slide on that. So please consider committing it to memory. It's not required for the exam though, but it will help you be a much better amateur radio operator. Phonetic alphabet. What information is contained in the preamble of a formal traffic message? So we did show an example of what it looked like. We had the ARL radiogram up on the screen, so you could look at that if you wish to refer. But they're asking us here, the keyword in this question, preamble, right? The answer is the information that is needed to track the message. So in the preamble, you have that information tracking the message. You can track the message with the information from the preamble section of the message. What is meant by the term check in reference to a formal traffic message? Remember we had the radiogram, we showed you the place where the check was and what it does. It is simply the number of words or word equivalents in the text portion of the message. In other words, how many words are actually in the message, the body of the message itself. It's called a check, and it's written on top. When do the FCC not apply, when do the FCC rules not apply to the operation of an amateur station? Well, that's a trick question because the FCC rules always apply, all right? Are amateur station control operators ever permitted to operate outside the frequency privileges of their license? So let's take that slowly. Just now, we just say FCC rules always apply, right? So they always apply, that doesn't change. But we're talking here now about something else, right? Are amateur station control operators ever permitted to operate outside the frequency privileges of their license class? In other words, your technician class. All right, I think we had some questions here. Okay, so I'm hearing that we did have an earthquake or shake, right? So just after the class or during the break, I will go and take a look at the seismometer, see what magnitude it was, the location, and get back. Thanks very much, Lisa, Charlene, and Colin. All right, so be safe out there. Trust all as well. I have to say I did not feel it myself. I'm located in Chaguanas. All right, so here we are talking amateur radio emergency communications, and we had a little shake. All right, folks, thanks for letting me know. Great group, I must say. Really, really enjoy having all of you in this class. It's a pleasure to be, part of this session with you. All right, so are amateur station control operators ever permitted to operate outside the frequency privileges of their license class? The answer is yes, but only if necessary in situations involving the immediate safety of human life or protection of property. In other words, we say life or death situations. Yes. So if you're a technician operator and you don't normally have HF privileges, guess what? In such a situation, you can, all right? But note, rules always apply. But if it's life and death or human life and protection of property, you can, as a net control operator, be permitted to operate outside of your normal frequency privileges of your license class, right? Notice they say it's a kind of catch-22. But as I mentioned in the last class, please don't do it otherwise. Okay, thanks a lot there, Mark, as well, Felton Belmont. All right. Okay, that's one wonderful thing about radio operations and so on. We get a lot of that type of updates. Zello, radio frequency. Yeah, okay, cool. All right. So continuing right along, again, to those who might have just joined, we are just quickly going through the questions in the question pool because last class we dealt with all of this theory. Which amateur radio stations may make contact with an amateur radio station on the International Space Station or the ISS using 2 meter and 70 centimeter band frequencies? And I have some really good news for you. There's a new crossband repeater, or at least a reactivated crossband repeater in the ISS as of September 2nd. So guess what? You have a space station you can communicate with now. So getting back to the question, the answer is any amateur holding a technician or higher class license. In other words, once you sit your exam and you pass and you get your FCC certificate, your ARL certificate, and you go to TAT and get your basic class license, guess what? You can communicate using the ISS. Yes, you can. What is meant by the statement that a satellite is operating in UV mode? Right, remember the U is UHF, the V is VHF, right? The satellite uplink is in the 70 centimeter band, or UHF, and the downlink is in the 2 meter band, also VHF, yes? See where the knowing where VHF, UHF, HF, and so on comes in? All right, next question. I'll take a break shortly. What mode of transmission is commonly used by amateur radio satellites? All of these are correct. SSB, FM, CW data. What is the impact of using too much ERP or effective radiated power on a satellite uplink? You might block access by other users. Remember we said use only the amount of power you need to? Which of the following is a good way to judge whether your uplink power is neither too high nor too low? Well, we dealt with it and we had said that your signal strength on the downlink should be about the same as the beacon. What do the initials LEO or LEO tell you about an amateur satellite? It simply means that the satellite is located in a low Earth orbit. That's what LEO means. What is a satellite beacon? It's a transmission from a satellite that contains status information. What telemetry information is typically transmitted by satellite beacons? You get the health and the status of the satellite. Who may receive telemetry from a space station? Well, simply anyone who can receive the signal. Once you could get the signal, you could receive it. It's not restricted. Which of the following are provided by satellite tracking programs? Well, all of these are correct. You can get maps that show the real-time position with satellite track over the Earth. You can get the time, the azimuth, and elevation of the start, the maximum altitude, and the end of a pass. All of that is provided by the satellite tracking program. Also, the apparent frequency of the satellite transmission that includes the effects of Doppler shift. All right, so you get all of that in the satellite tracking program. Which of the following are inputs to a satellite tracking program? Well, the only thing you really need to key in, apart from which satellite you want to track, if you have a new satellite, especially, you need to put in the, remember we call it the KEPs, well, it's the Keplerian elements. With regard to satellite communication, what is a Doppler shift? A Doppler shift is defined as an observed change in signal frequency caused by relative motion between the satellite and the Earth station. What causes spin fading of satellite signals? Right, remember we said the satellites always, they're not stabilized. Most of the amateur satellites are not. So therefore, spin fading is called by rotation of the satellite and its antennas. So folks, let's just take a very short break, 2 minutes or so, and we'll come back and try to cover the rest of these questions and go into some theory and see how much we can cover today. Okay, welcome back everyone. So according to a couple of these sources, it's a 5.5 or was a 5.5 magnitude earthquake. And the usual spot that we've been getting those just off of Venezuela there. So on your screen, that's the seismogram that shows, so it would have been felt for sure. Again, that amount of movement, I'm not surprised to know quite a lot of people felt it. All right, so, all right, so let's continue with the question pool, the no nonsense guide. All right, next question. Or did I say welcome back? So welcome back everyone. What operating activity involves contacting as many stations as possible during a period? That is called contesting. It's very popular with amateur radio operators. Which of the following is a good procedure when contacting another station in a radio contest? Remember, trying to make as many contacts as possible. So send only the minimum information needed for proper identification and the contest exchange. All right, so sometimes a serial number that you send along with your call sign, that's called the contest exchange. What is a grid locator? Well, hams often don't just use Latin long to describe where they are. They will send a letter number designator assigned to a geographic location. I think the last time I suggested, I mentioned my location is Foxtrot Kilo 90 Foxtrot Papa, FK90FP. So that is how we exchange our location as amateur radio operators using a grid locator. Which of the following methods is used to locate sources of noise interference or jamming? Radio direction finding. Just to let you know, sometimes that is called fox hunting. So if you hear that term, amateur radio operators will use, they simply mean radio direction finding. They could do it in a contest or to try to find sources of interference. Which of these items would be useful in a hidden transmitter hunt or direction finding or fox hunt? Well, you need a directional antenna so that you can move it around and see where the signal is coming from. What is IRLP, or the Internet Radio Linking Project? It's a technique used to connect amateur radio systems, such as repeaters, via the internet using what? VoIP, Voice over Internet Protocol. So that's what IRLP is. But what is VoIP? What is Voice over Internet Protocol as used in amateur radio? It's a method of delivering voice communications over the internet using digital techniques. The internet is so important today, it's so much used. So even though amateur radio operators use RF for radio frequency to communicate, we also use the internet because it's available and fairly reliable, or it could be fairly reliable. What must be done before you may use Echolink, the Echolink system, to communicate using the repeater? So we went through that today. You must register your call sign and provide proof of license. So you have to go to the Echolink website and register your call sign with your license. Again, it's one of the things that I strongly or highly recommend. As you get your license, you don't even have to have a piece of radio equipment and you are on the air. All right. You just need an app or software. Good. How might you obtain a list of active nodes that use VoIP? Well, all of these are correct. Again, we went through them. Subscribing to an online service from an online repeater list or from online repeater lists maintained by the local repeater frequency coordinator, as well as from a repeater directory. How do you access some of the IRLP nodes? Well, how is access to some IRLP nodes accomplished? Well, you use the keypad on your radio and press the buttons, and that is called DTMF signals. So by using DTMF signals. What type of tones are used to control repeaters linked by the Internet Relay Linking Project or IRLP protocol? You use DTMF. Remember we said that's dual tone multi-frequency. Don't need to know that for the exam, but that is what that is. Pressing the keypad and sending tones that become instruction to those repeaters to say, okay, link to this repeater, unlink to this repeater, link to this call sign, unlink to that other call sign. That is how you make connections using the repeaters from your handset or mobile radio. Right, what name is given to an amateur radio station that is used to connect to other amateur stations to the internet? And the answer is gateway. So this is where we are in the question pool. We'll return now to some theory, right? So we're on page 78 of the question pool. So let's go now to our slide deck. Okay, question. Right, so that frequency coordinator in Trinidad and Tobago, Lisa, is TAT, the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. Repeaters and beacons and so on must be coordinated by the Telecom Authority. All right. Good question, Lisa. All right. So back to our slides. All right. Okay. Right. So I hope everyone is seeing the slides. All right. So we now come to talk about FCC or rules and regulations, right? The FCC, now we are studying the American exam or the American system. So that's why the FCC is important to be aware of. So the FCC is the Federal Communications Commission, right? And we need to know that the amateur radio service is administered by the FCC. They are the authority. And I just put here that in Trinidad and Tobago, TAT, the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, is the equivalent. If you have to get your amateur radio license in Trinidad, they are the authority. You have to make your application to them and they will issue your local call sign. So they are in fact the local authority, but we are doing FCC exams, which they do accept. Once you get qualified, you take it and you will get your local license once your application is successful. We also need to note that Part 97 of the FCC regulations is for the amateur radio service, right? So just for you to know, this is what a copy of the FCC Part 97 looks like in booklet form. It's available, you could download it, and it's also available for purchase online. You get a copy. It's also freely available on our website, but if you prefer a book, you can get it, the Part 97 Rules and Regulations. As a matter of fact, I think I did circulate that to all participants on the first day of class. So you should already have the Part 97 document with you. A lot of the stuff that we go through, those regulations come straight out of Part 97, word for word. So what is the purpose of amateur radio? Well, one of the areas that we look at for that definition as to what is the purpose of amateur radio is in fact that FCC Part 97. And it says that the purpose of amateur radio is for recognition and enhancement of the value of the amateur service to the public as a voluntary, non-commercial communication service, particularly with respect to providing emergency communications. Also, continuation and extension of the amateur's proven ability to contribute to the advancement of the radio art. All right, in other words, experimentation. Encouragement and improvement of the amateur service through rules which provide for advancing skills in both the communication and technical phases of the art. Now, there's a reason I put this in yellow and bold and highlighted, because this is what you're going to get in your exam when they ask you, what is an example of the purpose of amateur radio? This is actually what you need to know, but we're putting all of it because we are amateur radio operators. We need to know what the amateur radio service is about. I have a way of saying that it's really a license to experiment, all right? So innovation is possible as amateurs. That's why you go through exams. That's why you go through theory, so that you are aware of the safety and interference concerns, so you don't cause harmful interference. You don't injure yourself or others. That's why we go through all of this. So you could be responsible, a responsible amateur radio operator once you get qualified. So next, expansion of the existing reservoir within the amateur radio service of trained operators, technicians, and electronic experts. All right. Also, continuation and extension of the amateur's unique ability to enhance international goodwill. All right. So those are the 5, if you want to call it, purposes or the purpose of amateur radio, according to the FCC. So we do have a couple definitions to concern ourselves with. We did deal with some of this before, so we just need to know the definitions. Beacon. A beacon is an amateur station transmitting communications for the purpose of observing propagation or related experimental activities. So I think this here is an example of what a beacon station looks like. A very big beacon station, right? I think somewhere in Germany, all right? And it transmits a signal so that you can see, are you hearing that signal? And if you're hearing that signal, that means propagation is good, meaning that the signals are coming across to you very nicely. So you can probably communicate with a ham on a similar band. That's the purpose of a beacon, all right? Space station, well, you already know this, but the definition is it's an amateur station located more than 50 kilometers above the Earth's surface. And a good example of an amateur station is the ISS. I did promise you, I told you, good news. As of September 2nd, the ISS now has a crossband repeater back in operation. The uplink frequency is 145.990, and it has a tone, CTCSS, or access tone, or PL of 67 hertz. In other words, if you don't transmit this, you will not activate the repeater. And it has a downlink frequency of 437.800 megahertz. So you see where all of this is coming together. If you had to program your radio, you need to know this information, and all of this theory that you did over the last several weeks allows you to program your radio by knowing what uplink is, downlink, CTCSS, and so on. So this is hot off the presses. As of September 2nd, the ISS crossband repeater is operational on the International Space Station. You can make contact with people across the world as it passes overhead. You can talk to South America, the rest of the Caribbean, Central America maybe, and all of that, using the repeater on the International Space Station via RF. Okay. What is harmful interference? Very important. Of all of the things that we do as hams, this is probably one of the most critical things that we always have to be mindful of in the back of our minds, that we know what harmful interference is. We should not cause, and we need to be able to identify it. So what is harmful interference? It's interference which endangers the functioning of a radio navigation service or of other safety services, or seriously degrades, obstructs, or repeatedly interrupts a radio communication service operating in accordance with the radio regulations, right? And note that willful interference to other amateur radio stations is not permitted at any time, all right? So just be mindful of what harmful interference is. Also, this is kind of along the lines of the question that Lisa asked, but remember we're doing FCC exams, so you need to know that a volunteer frequency coordinator that is recognized by local amateurs, that person recommends transmit and receive channels and other parameters for auxiliary and repeater stations, right? So a volunteer frequency coordinator. Right. Again, in Trinidad and Tobago, the Telecommunications Authority must be engaged in terms of coordinating frequencies for repeaters and beacons and that sort of thing, right? Also, amateur operators in a local or regional area whose stations are eligible to be repeaters or auxiliary station, they are the ones that come together and select the frequency coordinator. Sometimes you have a frequency coordinating committee, all right? But for your exam, you need to know this, how frequencies are assigned in the United States of America. It's a volunteer frequency coordinator, and they are selected by the hams who have or will likely have repeaters or auxiliary stations. Here is a repeater station. This is what it looks like on the inside. You have the transmitters, the duplexer, power supplies, batteries, and so on, right? Filters, notch filters. That's what the inside of a repeater station looks like. And this here is what a repeater antenna looks like. This is high above. This is the antenna here. Looks like a station master antenna, right? So repeater station. We need to know about the ITU. What is the ITU? Who is the ITU? Where do the radio regulations come from? Well, it comes from ITU. ITU is the International Telecommunications Union, all right? It's an agency of the United Nations for Information and Communication Technology Issues, or ICT issues. That's who the ITU is. So you need to know this. Who or what is the ITU? Very important organization. So the chart on the right-hand side, you may recall from previous slides or previous sessions. I reintroduced it here because this is a nice reference chart. It might be a little overly complex. I don't know, depending how we look at it. But this is something that we always have to bear in mind. I like to use something like this as a reference, to know what is HF, what is VHF, what is UHF, what is the 2-meter band, what is the 10-meter band, what are the frequencies, what band is 10.10 megahertz to 10.15 megahertz, and so on. So I like to have this little chart handy. So I've introduced it back here again for us to go through some of this material. All right. Note, it is a serious offense to use or operate on frequencies outside of the amateur radio band. Yes, you will become, or you are a licensed amateur radio operator, but you are not to use frequencies, especially transmit on frequencies outside of the amateur radio band. It's a serious offense. Enough said. It is important to know about the frequencies that amateur radio operators can use, as well as the modes that can be used on those frequencies. So you need to know what frequencies you could use and what modes, right? And you get that from your frequency allocation, from your license, as well as the band plan. All right, so we have a question. Well, ITU is sort of the overarching body, so that there's something called the World Radio Conference that exists, and that is how frequencies are decided upon. But at the end of the day, so this is answering Colin's question, right, regarding the FCC and ITU. At the end of the day, each nation is sovereign, right? So each nation has to decide for themselves what governs in their nation, but they do it through that coordination via the ITU at what is called WRC, World Radio Conference. So organizations like the FCC and so on will be part of the ITU, or they will have a structure to make comments and decide on those radio regulations. I have a slide coming up that will show you, did I put in the radio regulations? I can't recall if I did, but the ITU radio regulations is what governs globally. But each state is in fact, or each territory is in fact sovereign, right? So ITU consider them as an overarching body, but at the end of the day, each territory makes their laws. All right, Colin, so I hope that helps. Once there's cooperation, it should be unified and all should be well. Okay, so an example of a frequency in the 6-meter amateur band, you'll get this as an exam question, right? So if we were to look at the little reference chart we have here, 6-meter band, notice the 6-meter band here. It's in the VHF part of the spectrum, right? So it's 6 meters, but VHF, and it goes from 50 to 54 megahertz, right? So you just need to know that 52.525 megahertz is in the 6-meter band for your exam. How you come up with that? 52.2525 is between 50 and 54. So this is where that frequency is located. It's in the 6-meter band. It's also a VHF frequency. But you will get this question in the question pool. If you are transmitting on the frequency of 146.520, remember that was the national calling frequency, what band are you on? Take a moment to think. 146.520, where is that? It's between 144 and 148. That's the 2-meter band. So hams love to talk about these frequencies as 2-meter band, 6-meter band, 10-meter band, and so on and so on. So the national calling frequency of 146.520 is in the 2-meter band. So get familiar with this chart so that you get a little reference point, right? These are the questions in the question pool, but it's good to have a good idea of where things are in reference to each other. All right, let's see if we could a couple more slides again before we wrap up. Right, when you are setting your transmit frequency, or what is called your TX frequency, yes, you have these ranges, but you do not want to use a frequency on the edge of the band. So for example, if you are on the 20-meter band, which is 14.00 to 14.35 megahertz, you do not want to go on the frequency 14.00. The reason for that, if you transmit an upper sideband, notice on 14.200, your signal will occupy a space on the bandwidth in the spectrum above 14.200. But if you make a mistake and you switch to lower sideband, guess what? Your frequency will go below 14.200. Same thing if you use the 80-meter band as well, the 40-meter band, right? The 20-meter band is 14,200 at the edge. If you look at it here, you see 20 meters, 14,000, right? 14. So if you go on one frequency, all right, sorry about that. I realized I used the wrong slide here. All right, but nonetheless, the concept is the same. Make sure that when you are on a frequency that you are not selecting the edge, the beginning edge or the end edge of the band. You need to go lower than or you need to go higher than, especially for your transmit frequency. The simple reason is that if you go at the edge of the band and you transmit, because of the bandwidth occupied by the mode, your transmission might go into another band that you are not licensed to use, and that is illegal. So always bear in mind that the edge of the band, you do not want to transmit there, all right? So this is what it said here. When setting your transmit frequency, it is important to ensure that you do not set it to be exactly at the edge of an amateur band or subband. And there are some reasons, and you need to know this for the exam. First one, you need to allow for calibration error in the transmitter frequency display. So I have a frequency display here on your screen, 50.125. But we don't know if this is properly calibrated. Next thing, it is actually transmitting on 50.124 because of not being calibrated or miscalibrated or misaligned or something like that. So cater or make provision for that. You have to make those provisions that it might be a little off. Also, so that the modulation sidebands do not extend beyond the band edge. This is exactly what we were talking about here. If it is that you are the band edge and you transmit, your upper sideband or your lower sideband might go into the band, all right? So probably for the next class, I'll try to get the correct slide here to illustrate that. But the concepts are the same. You don't want to go above or below the band that you are licensed to. The last reason is to allow for transmitter frequency drift. In other words, over time, your equipment may be a little off frequency and it may drift up or down. So that's why you don't want to try and use a frequency on the exact edge of the bands. Hams do not do that, and you need to be aware of that. And these here are the reasons why, because these are answers in the question pool for your exam. Let's just do a couple more quick slides. All right, so for your exam, you need to know for the 1.25 meter band, also called the 219 to 225 megahertz part of the spectrum, that for the part of the spectrum from 219 to 220, you can only do fixed digital message forwarding. All right, so that is the question in the question pool. Whereas the 1.25 meter band extends from 219 megahertz to 225 megahertz. You can see that here. This is the spectrum. But from 219 to 220, you can only use fixed digital message forwarding systems only. I will circulate and forward to the class the band plan, the ARL band plan, so you will have all of this information in detail so you can reference. But this is an excerpt from it that shows that for the 1.25 meter band, this piece of the spectrum, 219 to 220, you cannot do voice, you cannot do SSB, you cannot do any other type of transmission, but fixed digital message forwarding systems only. And what is that? Well, those are stations that listen for a digital message, record them in a temporary storage, and then retransmit them. All right. So packet radio, for instance, if you're familiar with packet radio or APRS, those are examples of that. But you just need to know that for the exam, fixed digital message forwarding systems only is permitted in this part of the 1.25 meter band, meaning 219 to 220, you're only allowed that. The rest of the spectrum, notice you can do RTTY and phone. Phone is voice, right? Also, for the technician class, you do have HF privileges in the US, but I do have a note below here that in Trinidad and Tobago, when you get your technician class license in the US and you come to get a basic license in Trinidad and Tobago, you do not have HF privileges. So please bear that in mind. But for your exam, a technician does in fact have some HF privileges, right? So what band is that in? Well, you can do voice or SSB in the 10 meter band only. And if you were to look here on the right-hand side as part of the band plan, you'll see the 10 meter band, the 15 meter band, 40 meter band, 80 meter band. But notice the 10 meter band you can do SSB, and SSB is voice, single sideband is voice, in this section from 28.3 to 28.5 megahertz. You don't need to learn that frequency for your exam, but this is where you can do voice as a technician. There and only there can you do voice or phone. So you need to learn that. The 10-meter band is the only band that a technician class licensee will have some HF voice privileges in the US. Also, you need to learn and know that in the VHF part of the spectrum, right? So these are the frequencies in the VHF part of the spectrum here: 6-meter band, 2-meter band, 1.25-meter band. And the UHF, you have the 70 centimeter, 33 centimeter, and 23 centimeter bands, right? You need to know that on the VHF, UHF frequency ranges, you are limited to CW, or continuous wave. Also, sometimes people say that's Morse code. You are limited to CW only in these pieces of the spectrum. So on the 6-meter band, from 50.0 to 50.1 megahertz, CW only. On the 2-meter band, 144 to 144.1 megahertz, CW only. You're not permitted to do RTTY, you're not permitted to do voice, you're not permitted to do phone. You can only do CW. So I just put this here. This applies to all of the other slides. These are the types of modes, right, that you can transmit on, right? RTTY, radio teletype, data, phone, and so on, USB, CW, voice. Note that CW is this sort of sinusoidal wave here. You can only do CW in this part and this part of the spectrum. That's what's listed here. 50.0 megahertz to 50.1 megahertz and 144.0 megahertz to 144.1 megahertz. You need to simply learn that because it is a question in the question pool. So that's it for today. Next class, we will have to cover the questions in the question pool, but the good thing is we have covered all of the theory here. So when we go through it in the question pool, you will see these questions being asked as is, the word for word, all right? So feel free to review these slides when we send it off or the video recording. Yes, so I think that's where we are at. So I'd like to thank everyone for being a very great audience today and for your contributions as well. Our next class will be on Friday, the 11th of September, usual time 8:30 p.m., God's willing. And I'd like to say to everyone, you should already be attempting your practice tests or your practice exams. Feel free, you don't have to wait till we come to the complete end for you to be doing these practice exams. It will give you some confidence and an idea where you are at. I already got some reports from several students that, you know, we have been getting good marks, successes, passing, you know, 4 and 5 of them in a row, right? So that's really, really good. Some persons are reading ahead as well. So fantastic job by all. Really do appreciate all of the efforts that everyone is making. So I'd like to say to everyone, please continue to be safe. All the best. Do enjoy the rest of Friday. Have a great weekend and certainly a great week ahead. And hopefully see you next week, Friday. Thanks, everyone. All the best. Do have a good night.